Welcome, everybody, to the Power of New. We are your hosts, Mark and Julie Appleyard, founders of Anothen Global Ministries here in beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina.
Today, we're inviting you to join us in a new conversation around discipling nations through spiritual leadership principles that work at work. This interactive podcast will take you further and dive you deeper into exploring our Heavenly Father's always perfect love, as together we engage with real impact stories from kingdom marketplace leaders across the world.
And the Power of New podcast, of course, relies on the support of its listeners like you, so you can help us contribute delivering this incredible content by donating through the provided link. If you're a US resident or US-based business looking to donate, of course, your donation is always tax deductible.
Today's guest has lived in South Korea, Canada, and Germany before settling in the UK a decade ago. His diverse journey from military service to studies in art criticism and business, that sounds very interesting, led him to a successful career in finance. As an investment banker in London, he specialised in I don't even know what that means, in M&A, IPOs, and board advisory before moving into private equity at a leading US buyout fund. You'll have to explain some of that to us later. Now focused on kingdom investments, he develops innovative financial solutions to fund UK churches. He also serves as a trustee for his local church in London and supports gospel-centered initiatives across Europe through fundraising efforts. Minjae Choi, welcome to the Power of New. This guy's one of our favorites.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us, dear brother and friend.
Thank you so much for having me. Knowing who you are and your ministry, it's an honor to be part of this broadcast, really. Thank you for thinking of me.
We've actually, our relationship feels like it's been a lot longer than it actually has. Tell us a bit about your perspective on the story of when we met.
Oh, yeah, it's really sort of a experience of heaven on earth. That's how I would phrase it. We met in Stintenberg, this place in Germany where a bunch of sort of serious and sold out Christ followers gathered to share God's love together without any agenda or plan. And we just gathered there and resided in God's love expressed through the love for each other. And that's how we got connected through other friends. And then since then, I've been always keeping you in my prayers, and I'm sure you have also.
Indeed. And then we ended up in Thailand.
I think Thailand was first, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, right.
Bangkok was first. Bangkok was the end
of...
It's
the other way around.
Bangkok was the end of September.
Yeah, that's right. And then in October we were in Germany.
And then at the end of October we were in Germany. So or beginning of September in Bangkok. Right. That was when we were introduced to you, but we really got to know you a little bit better in Germany too. So
I completely forgot.
Yeah, right. Because it's been such a whirlwind. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So maybe just explain for those with us today, Minjae, even just to start, as Julie said, with M&A and IPOs, a little bit about that and a little bit about that part of your story.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, as you mentioned briefly, prior to that, my start of the academic career was in fine art. So I studied art criticism and curatorial practices in this university in Toronto, Canada.
Okay.
And this was 15 years, almost 20 years ago now. And so I really liked the subject, and I still love art very much. And I was in a completely different world. But during my military service, various things happened, and we can talk about it forever. But the shorter version is, after my military service, it was switched over to the finance world after my studies in business in Germany and the UK. And then through God's grace and his plan, which I can see now, not fully yet, but part of it, I switched my career into finance. So I started as an investment banker in London, and we were sort of M&A banker, which is an advisor to the corporate transactions when companies are buying or selling the entirety or part of their businesses. And our clients encompasses public market sort of listed companies as well as private companies. And that includes also IPO, which is initial public offering. When you are listing the company to the public market for the first time, they would also come to the investment bankers to get advice. So that was sort of my investment banking career, and later on, I've moved into private equity, where we were managing our own capital to buy out close to 100% of the stake of private assets to become shareholder and board members to sort of the run companies with new visions to eventually sell it and maximize your profit.
There you go.
Wow.
Handy guy to have around.
He's a good guy to hang around. If you're in the mergers and acquisitions, you don't talk to a guy. We know a fella right here. So your story of faith leading up to that, Minjae, tell us a little bit about those early years and your background.
Yeah. So my family's very small. The nuclear family. It was just my dad and my mom, my older brother, and myself. And we weren't Christians, and so growing up, I didn't have any Christian influence. My best friend during my elementary school time,
and this was in South Korea, is that correct?
It was right, correct. Yeah. So I moved out of the country when I was 17, 18.
Right.
So it was a long time ago, and when I was elementary school, so I must have been around 8 to 10. My best friend back then, he came from Christian family, so his family actually took me to church, and I started going to Sunday school, and that really was it. But then my mother, who sort of had to pick me up after Sunday school, she started going to the church because of me. She sat in the church buildings just to see what's going on, and then she started attending the services. And later on, she became Christian herself. And because she was very much interested in the scripture and especially sort of biblical history, I sort of grew up studying things like Leviticus. You know, when you're a teenager, you're learning about different types of sacrifices from my mother. And I felt very much like maybe a Jew in a sense, because it was all around Torah. And then later on, she found Christ in Old Testament, and then she became true Christian. And then when I was sort of a teenager in my high school, that's when I really understood the gospel and had an encounter with Jesus. And I think that's how I became Christian. And then God did many interesting things. I studied art, and then I had to do my military service as part of all the Korean boys have to do it. I'm South Korean, and so I had to go back and do that. And he blessed me with various opportunities and talents. And at some point, I remember during my military service, I was thinking about going to seminary school, and but he somehow guided me into this whole finance career so that I could do something related to that for his kingdom. And I'm just starting to see some of that. But I no longer pursue my own agenda. I let him guide me, and I just pray that he would help me do that out of obedience with the faith that he created and perfected himself.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So talk a bit about that sacred secular type of thing. You're a man who has, in the journey the Lord has taken you on, has got, I think, deep and intimate knowledge of both. What is it about? What is it about? Is there a gap that you see that exists? And if so, how would you articulate that gap that exists between the sacred and the secular?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't have an answer for that, but I just have my own sort of experience. So, as I mentioned, I wanted to go to the seminary school, and I had this lifelong debate with my mother. I always told her that this can't be the shape of my life of following Christ. There must be more than that. And in my sort of young mind, I thought, well, becoming a pastor, for example, and devoting your life with your profession that way is the sort of radical expression of that. And my mom said, no, that's not the case necessarily because of X, Y, Z, all based on biblical answers. So I can't really say anything back to that as a counter argument. But I always, and then I was blessed with all these opportunities. I was leading a seemingly successful career in finance here in London. But I always questioned, well, God must have something else in mind. What am I going to do eventually? And then I didn't quite know that. And then it sort of led to an abrupt resignation 2 years ago. And then now I'm doing all sorts of things that I never really thought I was going to do. But the secular and sacred divide, I'm not really sure about this. I think, first of all, to be involved in any sort of kingdom work or ministry work, if I can call it that way, we have to know the enemy. And the world is under the power of the prince of the air. If we don't know the enemy, how are we going to do the work? And especially in the field of finance, where everything is gripped by the power of mammon, which is a direct opposite of God.
Yeah.
We have to know it in the way the world is orchestrated or organized. And so I think the secular has to be experienced fully by, I think, Christians who want to do kingdom work in the world of finance and business. And then I think within that, we can be the light and show God's love in a different way, upside down way, which may seem completely different from the way we learn from the world in secular workplaces. So I think there isn't any clear divide because only by being inside of it can we be the light. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this very well. But,
this is good stuff. It leads me into my next question here.
Very good.
And that is now let's look at some of the practicalities of being the light. One thing that we know about you already, and one of the many things we love deeply about you, is your capacity to love and to allow God to love others through you. And it's a deep desire that you've got. It falls off your lips in every conversation. You can't help but talk and share about God's love, and therefore it releases wherever you are. Within the business context of this, the light of God, which really is the love of God being released as in a dark world, it sheds light on the world, doesn't it? How have you seen, practically speaking, that love lived out? Let's put some wheels on this for a second, in your own observations.
Maybe I will sort of narrow the scope of the answer within business, as you say. So I think a lot, again, is in the teaching of Christ. And I think this parable of dishonest manager, Luke 16, that to me was really the beginning of God's love expressed in business world. And he says, use your unrighteous wealth to make friends, like the dishonest manager did. So, and Luke's gospel, compared to 3 other gospels, is really about help the ones who are in need with your financial means that are given by God himself. And when we, in the business world, there is really financial abundance. And with that, what can we do to show God's love to people? It's just providing them for when they're in need. And that is who God is. And that's one expression of God, which I think was clear from the beginning. If we stop me if I'm jumping here and there. In the beginning, I think in I think in the Mosaic Law in Leviticus and primarily actually Exodus and Deuteronomy, we know God's care for the widow and the fatherless and the sojourners. And he has taught his people Israel, and today all of us who are in Christ, to love others by caring for them when they're in financial needs. And we also know from the Mosaic Law not to maximize your profit, not to sort of harvest until to the edge of the field, and let the sojourners glean whatever is fallen, the fallen grapes. And the Luke's Gospel again is teaching us to care for the ones who are in need all the time. So how do we care for them? How do we help them? How do we provide for them? The practical way to do it today, and also in the Old Testament times, is being generous and giving them when they're in need.
Yeah.
And so in the world of business and finance, where everything is about money, we can use that then to care for the ones who are in need, because that is who God is. That's what he has done himself. He has taught us to do, and what Jesus was doing himself during his ministry here for 3 years on earth.
Yeah.
And so I think that really is what business is for. And if they are, for whatever reason, receiving a lot from God, because everything belongs to God, even the ability to earn wealth is from God in Deuteronomy. We are to give and help the ones in need around us, not only for the sake of helping them, but to manifest God's love to the ones who
So
really
good.
need that. I think it's really when the ability and the means that we gain is also from God. I think it's also to Corinthians, when we are sowing and when we are being enriched by that, those seeds to sow are given by God first.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we are enriched is because he wants us to give generously. And so it's not that when we, maybe I'm jumping here, but when we think about business, we pray that God would bless us. And by being generous, we think we are going to be, the businesses that they are working on will be blessed. But actually the order should be that God is enriching us in order for us to be able to be generous to others. And I think that really is a simple teaching that he had taught us from the foundation of the world. And I think that really is why we are in business or in finance.
Yeah, this is great stuff, and I think where I start to see in the West, we tend to outsource the ministry component to the organized institutional church and go, well, I'll give my funds there, which is good and it's valid and it's right. That's fine, but it's like we also outsource the responsibility by doing that and go, now I've given to that. You guys go and do that sort of helping people in need stuff. I'll be over here as the economic engine doing my thing and
making the money.
Yeah, but there's this disconnect,
right,
between business leaders and the actual needs in front of them in the real world.
Yeah, and I think really what the conversation comes down to is that in kingdom economy there should be no divide between secular and sacred, because everything is sacred. Because everything God made is good, and yes, we live in a fallen world, and yes, there's some not nice stuff going on, and there's some corruption, and there's some whatever. But if as kingdom business people we do not see a divide between sacred and secular, if everything is sacred, then we can actually go about loving people the way that you're describing, Minjae, because there is no divide. It's not an either or. It's a just sacred. It's not even both end.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's just what I'm thinking.
The whole thought around, again, the why of business. I've been around a lot of marketplace ministry leaders, and one of the things I love is the the expression of, well, God is he's the original businessman. He created business, and partnering with him in that to actually release the resources. As you said, there's plenty of wealth. The world is not lacking in wealth. It's not lacking in resources, but it's the generation and allocation of those things into those points of need. And one of the things, particularly with marketplace leaders, I believe they're in a greater position to be able to identify and meet needs than perhaps even what historically the local church has been able to do. And I say that on a broader scale, not to minimize or to dilute the significance of what the local church does with that, because it does a very good job in ministering to the needs of the poor, the widows, and the like. But also, what about to the other business leaders? What about to the staff and to the clients and the customers who may not fall into the catch-all of widows, orphans, and the needy, but they've still also are people made in God's image who have very real needs to meet. And these are the people that a marketplace leader is interfacing with day after day after day after day after day. What an incredible opportunity there is there to be able to bring the love of God. Thus, again, bridging whatever secular sacred divide that we've created in society, actually bridging that and bringing those two things together again. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, you said a lot of things. I think God, if we think about his design before the great fall of Adam and Eve, everything was perfect. They didn't have any lack in the Garden of Eden. And because of the fall, now we are living in the fallen world. And what Jesus did when he was here on earth, he restored everything back to the original design by healing people.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, and that's really the physical expression of the sin that he restored.
I just want to press pause on that thought for a second. That alone, just don't lose what you're going to say, because that's going to be important too. But he was restoring creation to its original design by healing the sick. That is just, let that sink in for a second. I mean, what a beautiful display of the love of God in action. Of why he wants you to come into relationship with him. He wants to restore creation to its original design through you becoming more whole and healed and full and alive. It's a beautiful statement.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now continue.
No, but that's really important. Maybe that's what, I mean, it's all about that, actually. I mean, he restores it because he loves. He is love himself. And the love has been taken away from them because of sin. So he's restoring that. He's a redeemer. That's the whole thing about redemption. But the redemption is really restoring the experience of his love by bringing them back to them through Jesus Christ alone. And that really is the gospel. But then how is it expressed in many ways? Spiritually, the ultimate need is the spiritual need, which is now redeemed by Christ. And health also, when we are ill, restoration of the health itself is expression of love, and that's what perhaps healthcare workers are doing. Now, in the world of finance and business, we are not to lack resources. I mean, Adam and Eve, when before the fall, they didn't lack anything, but now we are lacking things because this is not how God designed it. And therefore, restoring that by providing for the need is just part of the redemption work. And I think that really is the sort of the expression of God's love in business and finance. You asked me something else earlier. I forgot what that was. I don't know what I was set out to explain. We were talking about secular and sacred divide. What was it, Mark?
I can't remember.
Don't even remember. It moves on too quick.
I got so enamored with that restorative statement. Everything else just sort of flew out the window at that point. But I think that what we're really getting highlighted here by Holy Spirit today is that the nature of the role of marketplace leaders in business is to partner with heaven in the restorative act,
Right.
and where historically things perhaps have created a divide is when we've outsourced that responsibility entirely to the organizational institutional church, which is doing a great job. It does what it does well, but it's not just its responsibility. And in actual fact, marketplace leaders have got just as much authority, have got just as much capacity to have impact through the work of their hands as well.
And probably more favor.
Right.
And more authority because they're in that arena all the time. A lot of people from well-meaning, I suppose, from churches will want to go into an area and pray, but unless they actually are in that arena, if they don't work in that arena, they don't have authority in that arena in the same way that someone who actually works and lives and eats and breathes would have authority.
Yeah. So let's maybe dive a little deeper then. In your view, what does it mean to disciple a nation? We've talked about some of the mechanics here, but actually let's just sort of we'll get a little more detail. We're sort of zooming back as well a bit on the macro. Let's get a working definition here from Minjae Choi. If you were to say discipling a nation means, and we've talked about the restorative act as well. But again, if you were to fill in the gap, discipling a nation means, how would you answer that?
That's a big question, Mark.
Everybody says that. It's a big question.
I think discipling, before maybe nation bit, discipling is, as Jesus was leaving, he had given us the Great Commission, and taking that responsibility and now doing the remainder of his work is maybe discipleship, and therefore the expression of this discipleship should be what he did. And I think what he did again was preaching, explaining the truth that have been hidden for ages because of the lie, and showing the way to people how it's supposed to be, thereby restoring everything, and doing so not by preaching and proclaiming only. I mean, that is what he had come here for, but by actually living it out, by rubbing off our lives onto other people's lives, and
good.
showing it in a real way. And so I think that's maybe sort of my explanation or verbal expression of discipleship. And how do we disciple the nation? I think is perhaps, I think it's done everywhere. We are, church is doing the work in terms of the proclamation that Jesus was doing, the preaching bit, the teaching.
Very important.
But they are perhaps not, these days at least, they are not really everywhere. They are not ubiquitous in a way that their influence or their presence has been reduced into their church buildings. And therefore, who are discipled within a church because of the proclamation are to then go out to the different contexts of their lives and then show different ways. Perhaps that's the discipleship. But I think, I'm just thinking out loud, I think in Ephesians, God has given the churches the apostles, prophets, evangelists, and teachers. And then in 1 Corinthians also seek the greater gifts, which is all this teaching and rebuking the church, the prophets, the prophecy. So I think that's what maybe the church is are to do in order for the people who are there to hear the truth and the way are trained. And then once they are trained to show different ways, which will go against the normal ways in the world, they are to live it out, no matter how difficult and sacrificial it may be to execute that. And I think how it looks like may be different in finance or in philanthropy or in healthcare or schools and everything. But it's really the ultimate expression is showing his way, which is very, very different from the way of life as we see it every day.
Well, I think what you're highlighting and it's starting to bubble to the surface here is that if we've got a kingdom business leader and we go, okay, we've got leadership training, leadership development within our organization, they take them to conferences, events, and they'll do some training online and, whatever, we've got online classes, all that kind of thing. There's a broader scope of the training if we're to raise up disciple makers of nations through business. There sounds like, there's, just hearing you talk there, that there's, yes, the church plays a role in some of that training and equipping, but actually now when we've got marketplace specifics of, okay, a person in M&A who is now going into all the world, that perhaps there's, if you're listening today and you are a marketplace leader in an organization of maybe 10 plus even employees, you're starting to get a few people that you're responsible for, and therefore training and that is a key part of your organization, or it's on your mind, or whatever, that perhaps there's some things to start thinking about of how do we, and I love you said this, rubbing against each other. How do we help young leaders go into the world to rub against other people with intent of bringing God's love? I know for me, I grew up, we were just sharing offline before we started here, our son and daughter-in-law have just moved into a home, and I got to do just a little bit of electrical work that was existing work, just replacing a few bits that were there and things. And but I learnt as through trade training to become an electrician in Australia many years ago, and my hands are reminding me it was many years ago, because boy, they are sore today. But the apprentice model, I think, is still arguably one of the better models that we've got available to us in that training and equipping, which really was, very simply put, from the leader or the tradesperson or the master first, is I do, you watch. We do together, you do, I watch, and then you do, and then report back to me for feedback. And that sort of process, a very, very, loosely said, was just such an incredible process of training and equipping people to move from zero knowledge base to becoming a master in their field. Perhaps there's some thoughts about that as well, that pertain to what does it mean to actually train up young kingdom entrepreneurs to partner effectively in this mission of the kingdom. What are your thoughts around that?
I don't have an answer for that, but I can just share my thoughts. And again, this is just, I know nothing, Mark and Julie. I'm here to learn primarily, but I think I really don't know. I think it's also 1 Corinthians. I think it's the folly of preaching that brings people to salvation, and I think it's maybe people have different thoughts, and I myself don't have an answer, but I really think it's the word ministry, but the word has to be opened by His own Spirit poured out to us. So that we just know it. In Jeremiah, it says, the Spirit, at some point, we won't even have to be taught. We will just know because of the Spirit. And I think the word, we first have to hear it, and it will sound like folly, like Paul says. But we have to hear it and know it and learn it with our mind, I think. And mind is very important, as Paul says himself. And then the real understanding of it with our heart, I think, comes from the Spirit through experiences and and living out, seeing someone else perhaps also living out that very love that God has first given us. And then I think our hearts are transformed, and we are then to do everything in the name of the Lord, as if we would do these things for the Lord, not for men.
Yeah.
And then whatever we do in business or out of business, I don't know, but as we conduct ourselves, we will be very acutely aware of Christ in our life and what he has done for us. And that awareness itself that we carry every day will change the way we do things. And the way we do things will look really silly and upside down and crazy. But that radical, crazy manifestation itself, I think, will then be changing someone else's life, because they may, it's perhaps not just one day thing. You do it over and over and over again, this unwavering faithfulness to this upside down approach. They will see that and say, okay, now I have to surrender to it, because this is not changing. This person is upside down all day long, every day. What's with that? And I think they will try to they will be curious, and then you get to do this folly of preaching, and then they hear it, they understand it, and they say, okay, then what is it? And then the Spirit reveals the truth, the way in their hearts, and they will know it, and then they will do the same, and they will do to other people, and then I think that becomes this nationwide discipleship that we are talking about, perhaps.
Yeah, which is like a life. That's good.
I can think of so many people right now who would be encouraged by hearing this.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
It's keep doing what we're doing. The kingdom is upside down. We are going to stand out. We are going to be different than everybody else around us. And people are going to look at us and think that we're strange and foolish and all of those things. But keep doing what you're doing, because that's just encouraging.
So I'm curious, mate. Out of all the things that are going on for you right now, what's really burning in your heart that you'd like to share today?
What I'm spending a lot of time on right now is relevant to, again, the world of finance, actually, and the church in the UK. So I'm based here in London, and I've been now living here for 10 years. And until the Lord calls me out of the country to go somewhere else, I will remain here. So my heart is for the country, and I'm very devoted to my own local church as well. And the church, and I spent a month in Latin America recently. The last stop was in Ecuador, Quito, and I had an honor of speaking to the National Director of Compassion, who is also a pastor at his church. And we spoke about how open their hearts are, and the sort of their expression of church in Quito and everything. And I realized that, when we think about mission work, I think we here in Western Europe naturally think about Africa or Latin America, but I think there, the hearts are ready. It seems, it feels they want to receive without quite knowing what it is. Whereas in the Western society, because of the extreme secularism, I think it's much harder to share the gospel, to share the good news. So then in the UK church, as I briefly mentioned earlier, because the influence or the presence of the church or the gospel is reduced to the church buildings, the organized form of church inevitably becomes a key instrument. But if we look at the statistics for the past 10 years, over 3,500 churches closed. And the key reason identified in the statistics is the financial lack of financial sustainability. They just simply don't have enough funds. And I had gone through sort of this headache myself because of my own local church as a trustee and treasurer. And I realized that, there are sort of a specific potential solution to this financial sustainability issue germane to the UK landscape, which is around property. And sorry, the one problem that I'm seeing is just the churches closing because of the financial problems. But another thing is very sort of inappropriate remuneration for the pastors, for the gospel workers. My friend who just got a job as a full-time gospel worker in one of the most prestigious and biggest church in the heart of London, they get paid less than 30,000 per year. And with that, in London, in heart of London, you can't do anything.
No,
and
wouldn't even cover your rent.
Exactly. So that's why, you know, the number of ordination has been decreasing a lot, just in the Church of England and other denominations as well here in the UK. And so the solution, potential solution, is for someone to fund the churches in order for them to be able to own properties, so that these gospel workers can live there and they have their small salary, but then maybe it's manageable because at least they don't have to worry about paying rent, thereby really allowing them to fully focus on the gospel work. And then for the church finance, because the rental expense is very high, and that sort of takes up most of the operational costs for the churches, by owning properties, these days the interest rate is going down, so it's a little bit questionable, but there are ways where you can save the cost by paying mortgage expense, which is lower than the rent you would pay in London and other parts of the UK.
Right.
So all in all, this could be a potential solution to facilitate long-term financial sustainability. And there's this really faithful company that does this very work, born out of God's love. And for some reason, the shareholder of the company decided to hand over the company to me. And I've been thinking about this and praying about this for 9 months by now, whether if it is the right thing to do.
Gotta be right time.
And I think finally I said yes to it. So that will be potentially a huge blessing for the church in the UK. And very miraculous. I mean, there are many stories behind this. I got connected to a lot of churches and church denominations and alliances that suddenly say they need this. And so we're in the process of fundraising in order to bless these churches financially so that they can actually stand on their own feet in the long run. And so that's one of a few other things that I'm spending a lot of time on at the moment.
Yeah, and that's something that is very dear to our heart, because we've served across a number of different denominations over the years, and it is just the perennial issue that just is there all the time.
It is.
And yet we see, in the context of where a lot of churches were purchased and bought, that they're sitting on real estate that is just, it's really substantial. And how do we release effectively the wealth that sits there to be able to fund the work, and to come up with new funding models that work and that develop and things along the line. And yeah, and I mean, it's well known what I'm about to share, so I'm not sharing something out of that betrays confidence. But we in Australia many years ago now, when was that? 2000.
I don't know which story you're telling, so I don't know.
Sale of the church. I'm just trying to think what it was now. 2003, 2000. Yeah, so somewhere in there. It's those early 2000s anyway. That's irrelevant, the actual date. But we became pastors of a church that was a respected church in the community, but it was a small church, and over years had got smaller and smaller and smaller. And a wonderful pastor who was a dear brother and friend and mentor as well, particularly in the area of pastoral care. beautiful man of God for whom I'm so eternally grateful for his input. That really, again, going back to this apprentice model, really helped me learn what did it mean to bring dignity to the image of God in people. Just astounding. So anyway, I became senior pastor of the church, and he stayed on staff to help me on the pastoral care side. But the buildings of this church that sat right in town were really coming under a state of significant disrepair. And this is a church that, not unlike what you said, that really was not seeing a lot of dollars coming through the door on a month-by-month basis. And it couldn't even pay salaries, let alone fix the buildings. And you go, what do you do with that? I mean, that's a big problem. And so anyway, so I thought, well, okay, let's talk to the people and see if we can raise the giving a little bit, which they were able to, and they did. And then I thought, well, let's get a appraisal on the property to see what the property valuation is worth. And as it came in, I think at 1.1 million, because the church owned the building outright. It owned it for many, many years. And so I thought, okay, we could borrow a little bit against that to, and try and borrow as little as we can to get the buildings done up a little bit, so at least it looks half decent. To give you an idea, the church house was sinking in the sand, quite literally. It actually was on a lean and the windows were cracking. And the back fellowship hall had an asbestos roof. So we had some big problems.
We had some issues.
These weren't little, just give it a lick of paint. This was not lipstick on a pig kind of issues. These were big ones. Anyway, but lo and behold, I think it was a month after I got that valuation, I get a letter from a commercial realtor, and I won't go into all the story now, but that offered 3.3 million for this site that I knew was valued at 1.1, and fast forward 12 months, it sold for 4.45 million. And you sit there and go, oh my gosh, all of a sudden this little church had a handful of
more
people.
money than it knew what to do with.
That's right. And that church was not in the property development game. That was not part of its calling. Its history spoke to impacting the community. And so we discovered a whole host of different ways that we could do that, and as story goes on. But it's this whole thing, again, it's a subject that's very dear to our hearts. How do we actually find creative ways to fund the work of the gospel and have real impact in a way? And for some churches, it does mean the necessity of maintaining buildings. For some, it may be actually getting into the property development space to generate, and others it may be sell up and invest so that you can. There's a whole host of different ways to think around these problems, but business type minds, again, marketplace leader minds, coming into an ecclesiastical problem at times can really, really help find solutions and navigate the waters.
Thank God for people like you, Minjae.
Yes, exactly.
The world needs your mind.
Indeed. And watch this space. Is there a particular testimony or story that jumps out to you?
Around this topic.
Anything at all, what he's doing in your life. We like to call them fresh testimonies, the fresh thing that God is doing.
Yeah, no, everything. I think for me, I resigned from what I was doing 2 years ago, and so it's been sort of 2 years of incomeless lifestyle, but still doing all these sort of a fundraising work and philanthropy work and all of that. And he has really faithfully provided for me in really interesting and funny ways. That's sort of the personal situation, but also the fact that the existing shareholder of this company wants to suddenly just hand over the company to me, and how I was connected to all these church alliances and different denominations that want to now speak with us about this opportunity to get funding for property ownership was also really interesting. One of the examples is that I went to this event in a law firm in London, and I bumped into this British gentleman, and we just had like 15 minutes of conversation. And then I was in South Korea for Lausanne, and after that I was praying, and I just randomly remembered his name, and I only spoke to him for 15 minutes. We have absolutely no connection whatsoever. So it was a bit weird. 2 days after, I remembered his name again, and I was like, what is this? What's going on? And then he emailed me 2 days after, asking for a call, and we had a wonderful conversation, primarily about the love of the Father, nothing else. And then that randomly sort of became the ignition for all these connections that was made to different denominations and everything. And now we are, there's a huge need for this service and product that this company offers. And I don't know what else. I really experienced his
So good.
hand all over the place and
Yeah.
everything, and his provision. And
Mm.
there are so many testimonies, and most of them are very personal. So I
of
probably
course.
will keep it to myself,
Of course.
or maybe I will tell you separately after
Yeah.
the podcast. But yeah, all
No,
the
but
time.
this is the book of Acts living, though, isn't it, Minjae?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's those sorts of things that, okay, you meet someone and then, randomly, and then these names get dropped back into your spirit at a time when you're least likely to have been thinking about, and then the connection takes place, and suddenly there's a whole new thing that the Lord's got for you to explore. It's really a contemporary expression of Book of Acts living.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And it gives us freedom, because I'm really not doing much. It's a headache for me, this business. I never wanted to do it. There's a lot of political sensitivity around it as well. So I'm quite content already without having to do any of these things. So it's God's work, and He is doing all this work. I'm just on the ride, guided by Him, step by step, committing and surrendering everything, just in His presence, knowing that this belongs to Him. He's doing something, and I am just to be obedient to His command, whatever it may be. And suddenly I'm freed from all the pressure, because there's nothing to do. And I'm also freed from my own ambition. When we talk about marketplace leaders, the most dangerous thing is our ambition taking over the place of God.
Yeah.
Even though the starting point is not like that, a lot of entrepreneurs out there, they
Right.
are gripped by that over time, because that's how the enemy works.
Yeah.
And
Great insight.
yeah, and as I see God's work everywhere, it also helps me stay away from my own sort of desires or ambitions and all of these things, because I am not to do anything. I don't have to do anything, and I cannot possibly claim that I'm doing any of these things, because it's just being done. Everything is just being aligned so far, and I'm sure it will continue to be that way. And I say this out of faith.
Yeah.
And so it's really the freedom He's giving.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, we call it the power of the partnered yes. We do. All I can control is my yes. That's all I can control. Am I going to say yes, or am I going to say no, Lord? That my input starts and finishes right there. It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. It is the power of a partnered yes, and it will take you to some of the craziest places and some of the most incredible things that we could ever ask, dream, or imagine. And it's what keeps us humble. It's we're only responsible for what He puts in front of us to say yes to. And maybe that's a takeaway for you today. If you've been listening here at The Power of New with our dear brother and friend Minjae Choi, it is this desire to say yes, Lord, when He puts those things in front of us, whether it is to take hold of a new mantle, whether it's to release a mantle, whether it's to stay in a mantle that feels heavy and hold on to, whatever it might be. Whatever He is calling us to, will we say yes, Lord? And that keeps humility front and center. It does, and it suddenly the scriptures become 4D in terms of their living.
Very true.
They really do.
It's probably time.
It is. Do you want
probably time? It's probably time. So I'm going to ask the fun question. What was, Minjae, the last thing that you purchased online, and what was it for? In the interests of new things.
I normally don't because I buy things in person, but I did actually purchase something on Wednesday, I think. I bought a pair of Nike shoes for children for this little boy in my Sunday school because it was his birthday in January. I missed his birthdays for the past few years, and with his parents' permission, I purchased these things. And it didn't arrive yet. I was supposed to give it to him this morning, but it didn't
no.
arrive. So I don't believe in online purchases anymore. I'm going to buy everything in person.
Man after my own heart. He's the internet Amazon junkie. I like to go to the shops.
Yeah, mind you though, I often get, honey.
Yeah, if I'm going to buy something online, I tell him to buy it.
Me, that's right. Exactly. Well, you get the prize for the online purchase that makes people want to cry when they hear something like that. That's a great story. And again, what a great way of bringing God's love.
Really,
that sums up beautifully. I think all that we've been talking about here today at The Power of New. And of course, The Power of New podcast does rely on the support of its listeners like you. And of course, if you're delivering, sorry, I just lost my thought.
Isn't that funny?
It helps us keep delivering this content to you every single week. Donations here. If you're a US resident, US-based business looking to donate, always tax deductible. And our friend and brother, Minjae Choi, what a joy again it is to be able to connect and to hear and recognize that our story is really just beginning together.
Mm-hmm. It is awesome.
Yeah, good. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Joseph Cabotet. Joseph is constantly putting up all the different things on our online broadcast. A big shout out to you, dear brother. It's an honor and a joy to have you partnering with us as well. And we are super thankful for you in helping us as we run this race together. So bless you and your household too. Hopefully, we'll see you actually maybe even next week. I think we're out.
At
with
Harry's
you guys,
group.
at Harry's group next week. So I hope to hug your neck and be able to be a blessing to you and be blessed by you as well, you and your beautiful family. We love and appreciate you too. Minjae, looking forward to see you soon. You stay right here. I'm going to hit the end stream button and then we can stay catching up for a few minutes afterwards. Yep, we're good? Excellent.
God wants to take you further and deeper.
Into encounters with his fathers. Our Father's always perfect love for greater impact because he wants to love the world through you. God bless you guys. We'll see you again next week.